When I say world building, you say, no. When I say world building, most of you watching this video will get excited because world building is maybe the most fun and satisfying part of being an author. Some might even argue that world building is the easiest part of being an author. Let me explain. By the way, you can come write with me right now. If you're watching this and it's still November, then I might be live and streaming my writing process for Novella November. You can check out the playlist below for the past live streams and come hang out in our super awesome Discord with hundreds of other active writers just like you. We share resources, tips, and our own writing for feedback and critique. It is a great place to go and get inspired to write, link below. So first, what is world building? Immediately, you might think of examples of great world building like Tolkien and Middle-earth, or Frank Herbert and Dune, or Brandon Sanderson and many of his celebrated books. Maybe C.S. Lewis and Narnia, George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire. Guys, get out of here. This is my video. So with these examples, you might naturally correlate world building with genre fiction. Genres like fantasy and science fiction, worlds of sorcery and magic, or galaxies of aliens and technology. And these are great examples of how world building can create a unique reading experience. However, world building is done in every single book. Romance and fiction and mystery and thrillers. And even if your book takes place in your hometown, you need to build the world for your audience so that they can experience everything in the same way that your characters do. An author like Christopher Rauccio, I think is maybe how you pronounce it, with his Sun Eater series, has to create an entire galaxy for his series to take place in. Political systems and alien races and technology that all need to work together for a reader to feel like they're experiencing a story in a real world. Galaxy? Universe? I don't know. However, authors like Stephen King, writing Under the Dome, have to build their world too. And the borders of that world may be a little bit smaller. Instead of creating political empires and religions and galaxies, Stephen King has to create small town politics, the map of the town, and the rules that these characters are going to play by. Even Larry McMurtry, with his book Lonesome Dove, has to build the world of the American plains in such a way that someone who has never experienced them can feel like they have. Does that make sense? World building is a basic skill of an author. And today, we're going to look at the secret sauce that different authors use to make their worlds come alive and feel full. Brandon Sanderson is a great resource for authors. Now hold up, before you Sanderson haters click away, I want you to know why he's a great resource for authors. Yes, he's popular. Yes, he writes approachable fantasy, and maybe that's not what you love, and that's okay. But he is bringing a lot of academic information to new writers. If you didn't know, Sanderson has an entire BYU college writing course available on YouTube for free. And if you have some spare time and you want to learn from someone who is a prolific and talented writer, no one else is putting out helpful, free information like he is, except for Writing Theory. And you can double up on this and look at his YouTube channel for even more free, helpful writing content. Now, going through these videos, Sanderson says that he follows 3 laws. And these laws are going to be heavily focused on fantasy and science fiction, but we are going to alter them to be non-genre specific. His first law is this: your ability to solve problems with magic in a satisfying way is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. Or if we alter this to be genre independent, your ability to solve conflict in a satisfying way depends on your reader's understanding of the rules of your world. If you're writing a horror novel and the monster has been shown to not be affected by fire, your book cannot satisfyingly conclude with the monster being killed by fire. You know what I'm saying? If you're writing a police procedural and you don't explain that your main character has experience on the bomb squad, you can't then conclude your big climactic moment with your main character defusing the bomb. There's a disconnect. Your readers need to understand all of the relevant information in order to experience your story at its fullest. And world building is largely exposition. And exposition is what your reader needs to know to fully experience your story. So step one of any world building is this: give the readers the information that they need. Now, determining what the reader needs to know is a skill that takes practice and editing. And you might not nail this on the first try. You might get notes back from editors or beta readers that say, I don't get this. I don't understand why this happened. And then it's up to you to modify your story so that the information that was previously missing is now able to be digested by a new reader. It is okay if your first draft misses some of that key information. Don't let it stop you from writing your whole story. And while you're editing, make sure that you have the tools that you need. This portion of the video is sponsored by Pro Writing Aid. Pro Writing Aid is the essential toolkit for every storyteller dedicated to helping you unlock your writing potential. It's made by writers for writers. I've been using Pro Writing Aid for years, ever since I bought a lifetime membership back in 2020. I even used it to edit my novella Starlight Farm's Kennel for Talking Dogs. Pro Writing Aid goes beyond other writing tools by providing you with actionable reports. These reports can break down your writing in a dozen different ways. The grammar report gives you feedback on spelling and grammar, but the report gets way more specific than that. You can use the readability report to ensure that your writing is easy and accessible to read, or use the transitions reports to get feedback on how each paragraph of your story flows into each other. And the best part of Pro Writing Aid is that it integrates with any writing tool that you use. I use Scrivener, and the Desktop Everywhere app lets me get those actionable reports in Scrivener. No more copying and pasting your story to and from different programs. Pro Writing Aid makes your editing process better and faster. When you use Pro Writing Aid, your data stays protected. It uses bank-level security to keep your writing safe and never uses your writing to train its algorithms. That's important. You can use my code WritingTheory10 to get 10% off of your order at checkout. Give it a shot. Sanderson's second law is that flaws and limitations are more interesting than powers. And again, this is a fantasy, science fiction focused thing, so let's modify it to something more genre independent, and that gives us conflict is more interesting than content. Kind of proud of that one. If you had a couple of days to plan the setting for a story, whether or not it was planning a fantasy world or setting up the streets of Chicago for a thriller, you could easily do that. Your fantasy world could be full of kingdoms and creatures and powers. Your Chicago streets could be dangerous and grimy and full of organized crime, or they could be stalked by a serial killer in the night. The content is there. But what makes these worlds you create work in a story is how that content interacts with your characters and plot. If you create an in-depth world, that's only half the battle. Your characters and your plot must be intertwined with that world applied to your book, because that's the important part. How does the world influence the climax of your story? How does it change how your characters are presented? How does it force the rest of your story to shift in an interesting way? If you could take your plot and your characters and plop them in a different book's world and nothing really changes, then you aren't using your world in an important enough way, if that makes sense. And this is why when you're planning a story, every element of your story kind of gets planned together. You don't sit down and say, I'm going to fully plan my plot, and then I'm going to fully plan my setting, and then I'm going to fully plan my characters. Now I'm done. Every decision that you make about one of those elements needs to impact and influence the others. That is a cohesive story. Sanderson's third law is this: before you can add something new to your setting, see if you can instead expand on what you have. Now, this one is not as fantasy focused, but let's still rephrase it along with our other laws. World depth is better than world width. Instead of adding more to your world, how can you get the most out of the elements you already have? A great example of this is Under the Dome by Stephen King. A small town that's cut off from the rest of the world with a dome. And that means that throughout this roughly 300,000 word story, Stephen King has very specific borders to work with. So instead of adding more locations to tell the story, he made the same locations serve more story purpose. Maybe the church goes from a gathering place to a gallows. Maybe a hospital goes from a medical center to a drug house. The events of the plot force the town to undergo a change. Instead of picking new locations to continually add new elements of the story, Stephen King had the town evolve as the plot and the characters changed it. And that leaves us with these three laws, altered from the fantasy and science fiction laws that Sanderson coined. Your ability to solve conflict in a satisfying way depends on your reader's understanding the rules of the world. Conflict is more interesting than content, and world depth is better than world width. Let me hit you with another important lesson regarding world building. You don't have to start from scratch. Now, this is of course a huge part of world building for modern fiction writers who are writing stories set in our world. The world building done in James Patterson books takes locations that we know and creates fictional, exciting depth. And the best example of this is the movie National Treasure. Great movie, I don't care what you say. How can we take real world locations and create depth? Introduce a secret society, plant clues based on the history of these places, and then all of a sudden our world feels like more than meets the eye. Now, there is another way that you can use history to influence your world building, and that's by retelling historical events in a new way. Just make sure you're not using this as a crutch. My story takes place in New York City. Well, then I don't need to focus too much on telling you the setting. You know the Big Apple. That's not good storytelling. You still need to give it attention and focus and give the reader the information they need to know. Instead of creating a new history for real places, what if we create new places and have history influence the events? Like George R.R. Martin, the prime example here. Now, Tolkien was also doing this, but let's stay a bit more modern. The events and the kingdoms of Westeros are so heavily inspired by the true happenings of European history that it is painfully apparent. Now, that doesn't stop anyone from enjoying the books, of course. I mean, it doesn't ruin any plot twists, of course not. But there's so much creativeness behind it. And the influence from history meant that George R.R. Martin didn't have to start from scratch. He was able to study history and the happenings between kingdoms and kings and war to inspire what he wanted to write about. You can build on things that are familiar to you. In fact, some of the best kind of stories take something that we know and twist it in a unique way. Urban fantasy, as a genre, built on this. The Dresden Files takes Chicago and adds a whole fake criminal underworld and political system. American Gods by Neil Gaiman explores whole pantheons in a modern world. Twisting the familiar is always something you can do. In a sense of modern storytelling is how we make our world feel like more than what it is. In a literature analysis approach, taking familiar tropes and iterating on them is how we create entire new genres. It's how we got grimdark fantasy and dark academia and so much more. World building is fun and almost a must-have of writing science fiction and fantasy. You could argue that it is the defining aspect of these genres. A fantasy story told outside of a fantasy world is no longer fantasy. What do you think about that? The important thing is that you don't get lost in your own world building. Not every detail that you planned in your story will make it into your book, and that's how it should be. You have the information you need to tell the story, but the reader has a different set of information that they need to experience the story. Those two things are not the same. If you find that you do way more planning than writing, then check out this video. And if you like this sort of narrative discussion, then subscribe to the channel and check out our Discord in the link below. I will see you there. And as always, thank you for watching.